shame is so isolating. It's extremely isolating. And I mean, looking back, I think, it would have been great if I had somebody in my life who could have been really blunt with me.
Welcome to the Multiamory podcast. I'm Jase.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Dedeker.
We believe in looking to the future of relationships, not maintaining the status quo of the past.
So whether you're monogamous, polyamorous, swinging, casually dating, or if you just do relationships differently, we see you and we're here for you.
On this episode of the Multiamory podcast, we're talking with Gloria Jackson-Nefertiti. She is an art model, former fundamentalist Christian, and breast cancer survivor whose 2013 diagnosis reminded her just how short life is. For that reason, she no longer cared what people thought of her, which served as the catalyst to help her come out loud and proud as bisexual, polyamorous, and sex positive. She's presented at numerous conferences, including Poly Living, Philadelphia, Polytopia, and the Woodhull Sexual Freedom Summit. And we're so happy to have you here, Gloria. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So, Gloria, you are a very interesting person. You have a lot of different interests and a lot of stories to share. The place that I want to start first is, so first of all, on this show, we're no stranger to fundamental Christianity in our backgrounds. Now,
well, the two of you are.
Yeah, Emily's kind of the odd person out because Emily was raised as a heathen atheist. But
wow,
I know it's. So
I can't
strange.
imagine what that would be like.
Yeah. But myself and Jase also have these fundamental Christian backgrounds, and also ended up in this kind of weird role reversal of being polyamorous and bisexual and sex positive and all these things. And so I would love to start there in kind of hearing a little bit of what that journey has been like for you.
Oh, boy. And let's see, I'm trying to think of where would be a good place to start. Let's see. Actually, maybe I'll just start with the fundamentalist Christian background. First, I was born and raised in Mississippi. I lived in Mississippi until I was 15, and and then we all moved to Portland, Oregon. We had some relatives there, but while I was in Mississippi, I became really involved with the church. And, and it continued after we moved to Portland. And let's see, in the mid 1970s, I was a student at Portland State University. And I was also a member of Campus Crusade for Christ.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah.
Actually, now that I think about it, I was also a member of Campus Crusade when I was in high school, and right. I just continued it in college. And then there was one day that I was on campus and I was, walking between buildings, and I happened to see this table. And there were these people who were starting this new campus ministry. And I found out that the head of the ministry, or the facilitator, or whatever you want to call him, he was a former staff member with Campus Crusade for Christ. Okay. Which I found interesting. And so anyway, I became involved with this group, and because I was really really impressed with how interested they were in evangelism. I mean, they would always preach about going into all the world and preach the gospel.
Right.
Yeah. So I was definitely interested in that, and so I became involved with this group, and a bunch of us lived together in this apartment complex in Beaverton, Oregon, which is a suburb of Portland, and gradually I started noticing things. Well, like for one thing, there were people from Campus Crusade who cautioned me about joining this group, because they said that the head of the group was very insensitive. He was the kind of person who didn't take criticism very well. And, and I thought, well, that's all well and good, but I mean, this, just looks great to me, So I joined the group. I moved in with them, and it wasn't very long until I realized that no, it wasn't a campus ministry. It was a cult.
Oh my goodness.
Oh no.
Yeah. And the way that I found out that it was a cult was because it was like we were the only ones who were following the Bible and were evangelizing the way Jesus said, I mean, it was this big us against them situation.
Right.
But what was especially difficult was that now in Portland, Oregon, it's a predominantly white area. And when I lived in Portland, it was very common for me to be the only Black person on the job, just the only Black person anywhere. I mean, there were other Black people who lived in Portland, but it was in really segregated areas, Yeah. And what I noticed is that since I was the only Black person, now this is so hard for me to believe and to imagine right now, but I was the first Black person that most of these people had even known before.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. And so I was constantly put in that situation where it was my job to, teach them, what Black people were like. And
yeah,
I mean, it was like I was the representative of the entire Black race, Yeah. And that was extremely difficult. But, one of the things that I noticed too is that this is really common with cults. And that is cult members can usually tell if somebody is lonely or doesn't really fit in, and they're looking for a family.
Right. That seems like a primary target for sure.
Right. And, and I think that was something that they picked up from me, and that also ties into my autism too. I wasn't diagnosed until last year.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
At the age of 63.
Wow.
Yeah. But all my life, I kind of knew that, I was just different from everybody else.
Right.
And I got bullied a lot because of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sure that when the people in the cult invited me to join their group, I'm sure that they, picked up, characteristics, they noticed how trusting I was,
of course,
for example,
Yeah.
And
so, I mean, what was the breaking point for you when, what was the moment where you realized, oh, I need to get out of this?
Yeah. Now this is going to sound so weird and so simplistic. The breaking point for me was I got my own bedroom for the first time in my life. Now, let me explain. Okay. Let me just back up a little bit. I came from a huge family. I'm the second oldest out of 8 kids.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Yes.
Goodness.
And so I always had to share a bedroom with somebody. In fact, when I was growing up, I not only had to share a bedroom, but there were some times that I actually had to share a bed.
Right.
Wow.
With my sisters, Yes. And so when I was living in the cult, I again had to share a bedroom with somebody. But I remember probably in the second year or something like that, or toward the end of the second year, people did some, shufflings, some room shufflings, basically, where they would move to a different room. And I also remembered that the group started growing. And so some people moved to a different apartment. And when that happened, then I ended up having my own bedroom for the first time in my life.
Wow.
And also for the first time in my life, I was able to finally think about what I wanted, what was important to me, what I believed. And I realized that so many of these beliefs that I was willing to die for, I realized I didn't believe them for a minute. Once I realized that, I just thought there's no way that I can stay in this group because I'm just totally going against my beliefs now.
Right.
Wow.
And what I also saw was just how misogynistic and hypocritical and racist this group was.
Of course.
They had a completely different set of standards for me.
Oh, really? Wow. And for you, it was having your own room was what gave you that mental space to just it all came into focus right away.
It really did.
Wow.
It really did.
Wow.
I didn't have anybody breathing down my neck, and telling me what I was supposed to believe,
Right.
Now, when I told the staff woman that I needed to leave the group, I remembered her saying, well, how do you know you're making the right decision, and how are you going to make it? And all I could do was tell her, I don't know. I just know that this is what I need to do. I really can't explain it, but I know that this is the right thing for me.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow.
And
seems
so
very brave.
Yeah, seriously. So after leaving this evangelical Christian cult, I mean, was it like the pendulum completely swung the other way and then it was all polyamory from then on?
All polyamory all the time.
Right. Well, actually, I didn't start identifying as polyamorous until maybe a few years later. But what I did do was, I just, after I, left the cult and left the church, then I started drinking and having sex.
I see. Okay.
In that order, Yeah, because I mean, these are things that I was constantly told I was not supposed to do.
Right.
That they were bad, they were evil, and the sex part especially, that made no sense because then once you have that ring on your finger and you get married, then it's okay to have sex. Which made no sense to me because I was told all my life that sex was bad, sex was evil, and
right. Seems like such a weird arbitrary distinction.
It really was. It really was. But yes, I started drinking and having sex in that order. And the person who I don't like to say, I lost my virginity with because, the idea of virginity, I mean, that's really just a social construct anyway. Mm-hmm. But I'll just say that the person I had my first sexual experience with was somebody who I met at a party. And there was a lot of alcohol, so so yes, I started drinking first and then having sex.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this was messaging that you also got, Gloria, in your upbringing, but I know for myself, I did the whole thing. I signed 2 different purity pledges when I was growing up.
Oh my goodness.
But I mean, so I got that, I got that message about, sex is shameful and you need to avoid it and you do not have sexual thoughts. But then for me, it was also coupled with this messaging of sex when you're married is amazing and it's awesome and it's transcendent and it's going to give you a blessed, happy marriage and it has so much power into it. And I know for myself on my own journey towards learning sex positivity, having sex and it not being both not being evil and also not being this like mind-blowing necessarily experience, especially not my first time, was such an important step on just being like, oh, sex is just normal and human, you know, which feels like more realistic sex positivity to me than this idea of sex is this incredibly intense, divine, magical thing that's going to change your life.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I want to move on to talk about shame, but I'm just really curious, just because, you know, I think that the listeners of our show will be curious as well. What was the journey into polyamory like?
Well, after I left the church and, you know, just started experimenting with, you know, various things that I was told that I wasn't supposed to do, you know, and of course, sex was one of them. And that was also around the time that I realized that I was bisexual. Yeah. And, you know, the kids today, you know, and I always hate to say this, you know, when I was your age, I was constantly told as a bisexual person that I needed to make up my mind.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
you know that I was straddling the fence, and you know I remember sometimes people when they would introduce me to somebody, you know, they would say something like, "Oh, you'll have to excuse Gloria, she can't make up her mind."
Oh my gosh.
Jeez.
Yeah, I know. That was pretty crappy, you know. So it's like you were either gay or straight, you know. Period.
Of course.
You know. Yes. And then also around that same time, this was like in the mid 1980s. I remember that personal ads started becoming popular, and you know, people were placing personal ads or answering ads, you know, in these, you know, different newspapers. Like when I lived in Portland, there was the Willamette Week, you know, which that was the newspaper that, you know, it had plenty of personal ads, and it was pretty similar to the Seattle Weekly.
Okay, I was thinking it was like The Stranger, but it's more like Seattle Weekly.
Right.
A little more mainstream, not like a...
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
Yes. And I remember there was one ad that I answered. It was a bisexual woman who had placed this ad. And so when I answered the ad, you know, now she and I never became sexual, but we became really good friends. And she was involved with, well, at the time it was called, you know, open relationships.
Right.
Right.
Yes. And what really intrigued me was when she would tell me about how when she would, you know, go on a date with a guy, and, you know, she'd receive a lot of loving and nurturing from the guy. And then she would go home to her boyfriend and receive a lot of loving and nurturing from him. And I thought, wow, that sounds great. You know?
Sign me up for that.
Yeah, really. Yeah. So, you know, I started, you know, dating different people who were involved with what was open relationships. I don't remember when it became, you know, ethical non-monogamy or polyamory, you know, but at the time it was just open relationships. And I'd been polyamorous since, well, gosh, probably, you know, like the 35 years or something like that. Yeah. But it didn't really become healthy for me until maybe 10 years ago.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
What was it that made that change?
I guess what really made the change was, you know, just finding better quality partners.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Right.
Amen to that.
Absolutely.
That was what really did it for me, you know. And then later on, well, let's see. Okay, my partner who I've been with the longest, I've been with him for 14 years. In fact, actually, we celebrated 14 years last month.
Oh, congrats.
Yeah, thank you. and then my other partner, we've known each other for like 10 years. And, but we've been partners for, like 7 years. So and they're just amazing. They really are. And then something else that happened during that time that made it so that my relationships are just a lot healthier now is, you mentioned the breast cancer diagnosis. Yes, in December 2013, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that diagnosis, in a way, was a gift for me because it showed me just how short life is.
Right.
Yeah.
And so as a result of realizing that, I realized that I no longer cared what people thought of me. And so that made it easy for me to come out as bisexual, polyamorous, and sex positive.
Wow.
And also by not caring what people thought of me, I was also able to set boundaries and to no longer allow people to treat me poorly.
Yeah.
Yeah. My goodness. Sorry. There's just like so much there. That sounds like such a peak moment of growth in one's life that I think all of us are constantly working on. I mean, not only getting to the point of not caring what people think of you, but also that being the thing that allows you to not let people treat you poorly. Like that's huge.
Oh yeah, it really is. It really is. I mean, because when I think of my relationships in the past, I mean, there was somebody who I was in a relationship with. Well, actually, I probably should put quote marks around the word relationship.
Right.
But there was somebody I was with for nearly 2 decades.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. And I mean, now as I think of that relationship, I just have to shake my head because I cannot imagine being with somebody who treated me so poorly.
Right.
Or, someone who I know is lying to me.
Right.
But, at the time, I wanted to believe him so badly,
Of course.
Yes. He was somebody who I met at the very first poly potluck I went to in Seattle. Yes. And, he said he was polyamorous and, and I believed him, but I would start, seeing different things that just did not add up, where I could tell that he wasn't being totally truthful with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, today, if that were to happen, if I could tell that someone is not being truthful with me, there is no way I'm going to let them get away with it.
Right.
I'm going to talk to them about it. And, if they become defensive or lie about lying, then I'll just have to call it off.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I know all three of us definitely have, nightmare stories of our past, of past partners, and kind of that same thing that sometimes it is so amazing when you look back in the past and be like, wow, how did I put up with that? But I guess that's what growth is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's actually a good transition into talking about shame. And now, we've on the podcast before, I think I've said this a billion times, like, we want to do a shame episode. We want to do a shame episode. We want to do a shame episode, because it comes up in a lot of different arenas,
Yes.
And so I've been in the middle of doing like a healing shame training from the Center for Healing Shame in Berkeley. This has been on my mind a lot. And, Gloria, you have this workshop that's simply titled Transcending Shame. You've run this workshop at many different conferences in many different spaces. Can you tell us about your inspiration for that and how that workshop came to be?
Well, let's see. I think, probably in 2010 or something like that. But I remember the workshop was called Sexual Shame. There were a couple of things that came into my mind, as I sat in this sexual shame workshop. One of the things I thought was that the examples that he used, they weren't necessarily unique to sexual shame. I mean, I really thought that they would apply to just shame, period. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thought that occurred to me was, wow, I could totally do a workshop like this, because as I sat there, I thought about the shame that I encountered in grade school and high school, being autistic, even though I didn't know at the time that, I was autistic, but I just knew that I got bullied a lot and constantly laughed at, just because I acted differently and talked differently from the people around me. And,
right.
So I would keep getting these messages that there was something wrong with me. There was certainly a lot of shame, from that. And then, I also thought about my years in the cult in Portland, being the only Black person. And I remember just, how shameful I felt, because, once again, I didn't fit in. I really wasn't part of the group, even though, technically I was part of the group, but I was always kind of on the outside, because basically I felt that I wasn't as good, so there was shame around that, and then of course, the shame around sex, and there was also shame around, having my first sexual experience so late in life. I mean, I was 25 years old, and from what I understand, most people have sex in high school,
Mm-hmm.
or in college. Yeah.
Right.
So there was an incredible amount of shame there. Yeah.
Right. I have a question. I'm curious. So when you had this, your breast cancer diagnosis, that for you, that like realizing how short life is was when you decided to stop caring what people think. I was curious, was then this looking into shame and what that's about was like, okay, now I need to figure out how to deal with this shame so that I can not care? Or was that sort of before, and then it took this to kind of get you the rest of the way there? Like, what was the timeline?
Well, let's see. I think that the, just the thinking about shame, came before the breast cancer diagnosis. Even though I didn't really do anything about it or, start teaching at conferences until after the diagnosis.
Got it.
Yeah. And what happened was, let's see, I was diagnosed in 2013, in December 2013. And, and then I had the surgeries in 2014. And let's see, in 2016, I started hearing about, different conferences who were looking for presenters. And I just right away, I thought about shame, and the title Transcending Shame, just came to me. I didn't really have to think about it. It just made sense to me.
Right.
And the very first place that I presented was at ConvergeCon in Vancouver, BC. This was in April 2017. Yeah. So, and the workshop has improved so much over the years.
Nice.
I remember that the very first time I did it, some of the examples I used were of people who used to be celebrities, maybe like in the 1980s. And, and I mean, they were good examples that I used, but being that I was using examples that the majority of the people sitting there in the workshop had never even heard of.
Right.
That was a little bit embarrassing.
Right.
But I thought, okay, I'm gonna file this away, and so now I use more contemporary examples, like.
Right.
Like Robert Downey Jr., for example, or Lizzo.
Right.
And I basically I use her as an example of somebody who is not ashamed at all.
Oh yeah, seriously, what a perfect example.
Yes. And I, as many times as I've taught this workshop, I still think I really ought to take some lessons from Lizzo. Seriously, if that's possible. Yeah, really.
So maybe this is something that you discuss in your workshop, but it seems sort of like shame is a root cause for a lot of other things in your life, or a lot of other emotions like fear and anger and sadness and things along those lines. Can you talk a little bit about maybe how shame relates to those other emotions and to what maybe it prevails life in general in terms of if you are angry or sad or have constant patterns of fear?
Yes, well, I would say that where the shame really comes in is if I'm in a relationship with somebody who has a habit of shaming me, and the person who I'm thinking about, again, the person who I mentioned earlier, who I had been in a relationship with for nearly 2 decades, so I remember that there were so many times that he just seemed to have a problem with how I expressed myself. Any quote unquote negative emotions, like if I was angry, and a lot of the time, well, I would say probably 100% of the time, I had good reason to be angry because he would provoke me, or constantly point out what I quote unquote had wrong with me,
right?
But let me see. There's a really good example of when we hadn't been seeing each other for very long, and I remember he said something to me that was extremely shaming for me. What had happened was he noticed that I didn't really seem to ask very many questions. Whenever we would have conversations. And, part of it was that I was nervous,
Right.
Yeah. And I remember what he thought was that since I didn't ask questions, then that must mean that I'm just not interested in people, Yeah. And so what he said to me that just brought up all this shame is he said, I resign myself to the fact that you'll never be interested in other people. Which was a really, really crappy thing to say to somebody. I mean, he just made this assumption that if I don't ask questions in any of our conversations, then that must mean that I'm not interested. I'm not interested in people. And, and when he said that, my face, my cheeks just became really hot. And I felt this, I had this sick feeling in the pit of my stomach, which is how shame manifests itself for me. Mm-hmm. And when he said that, I just felt so unworthy, and just so wrong.
Right.
And I mean, nowadays, if somebody were to say something as off the wall as that,
yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure what I would say to them. I definitely would not feel shame, because I would know just how inappropriate it is to say something like that to someone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And to basically make this assumption, Yeah. So, yes, anytime I felt anger or fear or sadness or frustration or anything, he always seemed to think that I was responding to the situation wrong.
Mm.
He always had a problem with how I reacted.
Right.
And it was always wrong as far as he was concerned, and that was where a lot of the shame came from for me.
Yeah.
The shame around my emotions. And I mean, looking back, I'll have to say that the ways that I've responded to situations have always been appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I could be dealing with trauma, or childhood trauma, or I could be triggered by something.
Yeah, I was wondering, because in your example, you were talking about, the difference between sort of like how for you, if someone said that to you, it wouldn't mm-hmm. have the same effect, probably because now you're able to identify like, oh, they're trying to do this to me, and I know that my reaction is okay.
Right.
I'm curious, in working with people on this and in your workshops, I know for a lot of us, there's shame that's kind of like in our adult lives, but then there's also a bunch of it we bring with us from our upbringings. Like, we talked earlier in the episode about religion, or just the things that our parents might have said to us, not realizing the impact it would have on us, or maybe did realize the impact it would have on us. But either way, right, that sometimes is harder to identify because it's like deeper in there. Have you found that to be true, or does it kind of like you can apply this across the board?
Yeah. Well, what I found, I mean, is part of that, but what I've also found too is that if you have a community around you, some people who you can talk to, people you can vent, to, if the, say if you're experiencing microaggressions at work, mm-hmm. for example, or say if you're in a relationship with somebody who shames you, or if your parents shame you, or your church or whatever. What I tell people in my workshops is that it's just so important to have a community of people who you can talk to, and so you can, realize that there are other people who have probably experienced the same things, and you don't feel so alone anymore. One of the other things that I found is that shame is so isolating.
Yeah,
it's extremely isolating. And I mean, that was another thing that I found in this relationship, is that over the years, I really hated to tell my friends about him, or what he did or what he said, or whatever, because deep down inside, I knew that something wasn't right.
Right.
But I was feeling so much shame, and I, was just too ashamed and embarrassed to even tell people what was going on. I mean, looking back, I think, it would have been great if I had somebody in my life who could have been really blunt with me.
Yeah.
And to, point out what they see going on, and, and to tell me that, you really deserve way better than that. You can do better than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, actually, when I first got into the relationship, I would occasionally tell people things, like for instance, I would tell them that, well, I'm in love with him, but he's not in love with me. And, and people would say, wow, that really doesn't sound right.
Right.
Or I tell them about other things and they say, wow, this doesn't sound good to me.
If we want to talk about, just like an internal shame and sort of how to get past that a little bit as well, because we've talked about a bit about the shame that often occurs from another person. But I mean, I know personally for myself, I have felt shame for a lot of different reasons, for, how smart I am compared to other people or not, or any number of things. So can we talk a little bit about that in terms of, things like our own gender or sex or race or sexual orientation, even being polyamorous, our identity and the shame that may come from things like that?
Yes. One of the things that I do toward the end of the workshop is, well, first I'll give some examples of people who, definitely have no shame, and I mentioned Lizzo, for example. Yes. And that's actually the section that I call, these are people who society thinks should be ashamed, but who aren't.
Yeah. Wow.
And then after that, then I ask everybody a question and I say, what is it about you, or what is it about your background that society seems to think you should be ashamed of? And I'll hear things like, well, I'm trans, or I'm bisexual, or I'm polyamorous, or I'm a sex worker, and people will name off all of these things, and I mean, what that does actually is it it helps it helps them to see that they're not alone.
Yeah.
In a recording of one of your workshops that we all listened to before this episode, you talked about how people are much more likely to share all sorts of other feelings before they're willing to admit feeling shame. It's like even admitting feeling shame is shameful.
Yes. In fact, that's something else that I bring up, is that there's shame around feeling shame.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is kind of a weird paradox in a way.
Right, but that's kind of how it has such a strong hold on us, because that's how we end up feeling so alone. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like so cyclical.
Oh yeah. It really is. And again, that's where having a supportive community of people around you, just makes all the difference in the world.
And it sounds like specifically you have been able over time to cut out the people in your life that don't represent that to you, that aren't supportive and good to you, and then keep the people in your life who are. And that's really extraordinary to me, because that's easier said than done sometimes.
Oh yeah, it is. Well, I mean, when I didn't like myself, which was actually the majority of my life, until the cancer diagnosis, I would keep people around who were toxic and unsupportive, and but. I guess for one thing, I didn't really feel like I had any choices in the matter, and I felt that I had to have somebody around,
Right. And like, that was just normal. Like, I should feel ashamed. So there's nothing wrong with people telling me that. Yeah.
Right. Well, and also not only normal, but it just felt familiar to me because, like the household that I grew up in was very, very abusive. And I mean, even to the point of domestic violence.
Yeah.
So I'm also a domestic violence survivor. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah,
just a second. Dedeker lost her connection, and she's just
I'm back.
There she is.
I'm sorry.
Great.
I was trying to sneak in
down
real quiet, like
and constantly
sorry, I had
me
some PC
to
issues,
doubt
but
myself.
It looks like I'm back on track.
I mean, that felt totally normal and familiar to me, but I cannot imagine doing that now. I mean, people like that won't even get the time of day for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to read something real quick. Now, I don't remember if I gave you this handout that I normally give out at the Transcending Shame workshops, but it's a handout that I made, or a tip sheet, whatever you want to call it.
Yes, maybe I can link that.
4 ways to transcend shame. Yes, and if you could link to that, or I could, I could send it to you.
Definitely.
Yes, but the so the 4 ways are to love and forgive yourself. And I use this quote from John Bradshaw, who wrote this book that was really, really important in the area of shame. And I'll constantly quote from the book during the workshop. But one thing that he said that I thought was really important as far as being able to love and forgive yourself. It said, toxic shame's greatest enemy is the statement, "I love myself." To say I love myself can become your most powerful tool in healing the shame that binds you. To truly love yourself will transform your life.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes so much sense that those two statements are just so diametrically opposed to each other, those two feelings, self-love and shame. And it's, I think it's not surprising that so many of us, I think, really struggle with self-love. I think because we've kind of been trained to turn to the shame first to a certain extent.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't want to give the impression that I never feel shame anymore, because that's not true. I mean, I will occasionally feel shame, but because of doing this work in the area of shame now, I'm able to notice a lot quicker that I'm being shamed.
I'm wondering, your opinion, Gloria, what do you think needs to happen on a more macro societal level when it comes to dealing with shame?
Oh my gosh. That's a really difficult one, because a lot of the shame is around, things that you can't help. I mean, the color of your skin, your socioeconomic background, the family you grew up with, so that's a really, really difficult one, because so something has to happen, basically at the very top.
Yeah.
And if the people who are in power, I mean, if they have racist attitudes, then I mean, there's really not a whole lot that you can do about it. But I guess I just would have to get back to what I was saying earlier about, have a community, have a supportive community around you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think even just the value of getting messaging around, you're not like you're normal, like this is okay. You know, I know that that's in my own journey, especially toward, you know, discovering my own sexuality and my own relationship orientation, that that was a really pivotal moment for me, even just knowing, oh my goodness, there's other people out there who feel the same way. And I know that's something that we get messages sent to us a lot from people being like, oh my goodness, like it's so nice to know just that I'm not the only one, you know, and that this is normal and I'm not a weirdo for feeling this way.
Yeah.
I mean, the truth being that like we are all weirdos for feeling this way to a certain extent. We're just weirdos inherently. But yeah, I mean, even that little bit of counter shaming just goes such a long way, I feel. And kind of related, I want to pivot a little bit because you mentioned early on about your autism diagnosis coming really late in your life. And I know that I've heard from a lot of people in our online community, you know, from listeners of ours who are not neurotypical or who are on the autism spectrum or things like that, that there's also that kind of special flavor of shame to work through as well. And so I want to hear your personal experience, you know, getting this autism diagnosis, you know, at the age of 62, you know, just last year. How has that affected your life and your approach?
Wow. It's really interesting. I mean, you know, I guess one of the things that I noticed is that I'm just a lot more accepting and a lot more compassionate with myself. You know, before, actually, it was like I think 15 or so years ago that I finally started suspecting that, you know, maybe I was on the autism spectrum. I mean, that was around the time that I started hearing about Asperger's syndrome, which I don't know if very many people call it that anymore, because, you know, we found out that Hans Asperger was a Nazi sympathizer. So,
oh gosh, I didn't know that.
I did not know that. Wow.
Yeah. So, you know, a lot of people don't call it Asperger's syndrome anymore. So I just call it autism. But anyway, at the time, you know, 15 years ago, when it was called Asperger's syndrome, and I just started hearing about it, and you know, reading what the characteristics were, and I thought, oh my gosh, that sounds just like me, you know.
Right.
And so I took one of those online tests, you know,
I see.
to see if I had it, and you know, and according to this online test, which took like 10 minutes, you know, it said that I didn't have it, but but then last year, you know, I talked to my therapist, who is just great. I mean, you know, she's kink friendly and poly friendly, LGBTQ friendly.
Yeah,
you know,
that's great.
And she also assesses people for autism. You know, and so the assessments that I went through, I mean, it was just several pages of, you know, just various tests, and you know, and so I mean, it was way more than that, you know, 10-minute online test that I took, you know, and also one of my partners had to write a statement. I don't remember what questions he was asked, but you know, just basically to you know, tell, you know, basically an evaluation of me, you know. Yeah. Right. And, you know, so that was something that also helped my therapist to make the diagnosis, you know. But I'm being way more open about it now. You know, now that I know that I'm autistic. I mean, there are so many people who have told me that, you know, boy, I can't really believe you're autistic, or, you know, I can't really imagine, you know, but, the thing is, I'm what some people would call high functioning autistic, although I really don't like to use that terminology,
right?
Because unfortunately, if people see me as high functioning, then it's easier for them to become angry with me if I respond to situations in certain ways that don't make sense to them. Right. You know, I mean, I've had people over the years say, why did you say that? Or why did you respond this way? And all I could do was kind of shrug, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and now I know that, well, being autistic, I know that I process information differently from other people, you know, and so, you know, I'll respond the way that makes sense to me.
Right.
Oh?
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like to a certain extent for you that this has been very like a freeing diagnosis.
It really has been. It really has been. I just wish that I had been diagnosed a lot sooner.
Right.
You know, I think it would have saved me just so much, you know, hassle and you know, and heartache and misunderstanding.
Of course. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really amazing conversation about so many things. And thank you so much for talking with us. Can we hear from you where people can go to find more of you, find more of your work, any upcoming projects that you want to promote?
So I'll be speaking at Minnesota PolyCon, and that will be July 18th, and it's online. I'm pretty sure that it's on Zoom. Yes.
Perfect. Okay.
Yes.
We'll have to check that out.
Yeah. Yes. Please do. Please do. Yes. You know, and so far I don't have anything scheduled, but you know, that always changes, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm especially right now.
Oh, yes, really. You know, and I'm kind of frustrated because there were a few conferences in April and May that I was scheduled to speak. Actually, in June and July too. I mean, I was going to be speaking at Black and Poly Pride.
Right.
Which was, I think it was going to be either this week or last week.
Yeah, because we did a big interview with the organizers. Yeah, a couple of months ago.
They were so amazing. Yeah.
Yes, really. And then I was looking forward to speaking at Poly Dallas next month.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, same with us.
I'd never been before, and you know, and I think that's postponed to next year.
Yeah. Well, with all these things, we're gonna have to do just like party twice as hard next year.
Absolutely.
Really?
I'm trying to think about it.
About right.
Yeah, like do workshops that are just like twice as amazing.
Yes, really.
Just really try to make up for it.
All right. So we're going to now go and do a little bit of a bonus episode together where we're going to talk about a recent workshop that Gloria did and some kind of life-changing questions from that she wanted to share with us. That's going to be in our bonus episode for our Patreon supporters. So if you want to get access to that, you can go check that out. Also, we would love to hear your thoughts on this episode. What has your experience been with shame? What's your journey been like? Have you found community that's helped support you in getting over that? Or is that something you're still looking for? The best place you can share your thoughts with other listeners is on this episode's discussion thread in our private Facebook group or Discord chat. You can get access to these groups and join our exclusive community by going to patreon.com/multiamory. In addition, you can share with us publicly on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. You can email us at info@multiamory.com. Multiamory is created and produced by Emily Matlack, Dedeker Winston, and me, Jase Lindgren. Our episodes are edited by Mauricio Balvanera. Our social media wizard is Will McMillan. Our production assistants are Rachel Shenowork and Carson Collins. Our theme song is Forms I Know I Did by Josh and Anand from the Fractal Cave EP. The full transcript is available on this episode's page on multiamory.com.